under the blade of history and the present. There are wounds in the memory of humanity that never truly heal, wounds etched deep with blood, tears, and desperate screams. Torture, a word as cold and sharp as a blade, has long been one of the most widely used methods for punishing prisoners throughout thousands of years of history. These brutal forms of torture didn't just bring excruciating pain to the victims, they also left indelible scars on the collective soul of humankind. The following video opens a door into a dark world where such horrific methods were not only used to punish, but also to assert the power of those who ruled. In the Middle Ages, torture methods like sawing people in half, dismemberment by slow slicing, and burning at the stake were designed not just to kill, but to sow terror in the hearts of witnesses, turning pain into a declaration of absolute power. Below is a detailed account of some of the most savage torture methods ever devised, each as piercing as a dagger to the heart of human decency. 1. The Judas Cradle. Imagine a person forced to sit atop a pyramid-shaped device, its sharp, cold point a cruel metaphor for the executioner's mercilessness. Closely related to impalement, this horrific method left prisoners with no escape from agony. Rough, tightly bound ropes held their limbs, gradually pulling them in different directions, forcing the pointed tip deep into their rectum or genitals. The pain was relentless. To add humiliation to horror, the victim was stripped naked, left exposed and trembling before a crowd. The device, filthy and rarely cleaned, was a breeding ground for bacteria. Infections were common, stretching their torment far beyond the initial torture. 2. The Brazen Bull. Originating in ancient Greece, this nightmarish device was crafted entirely from solid brass. Hollow inside, it contained a platform with internal rods for the victim to grip as they endured their punishment. Once sealed inside, a fire was lit beneath the bull, heating the metal until it glowed red-hot. The victim was slowly roasted alive, their flesh searing, every breath mixing with smoke and pain. Ingeniously cruel, the bull was designed to amplify their screams, transforming them into the sound of an enraged beast, as if to compose a horrific symphony of agony between life and death. 3. Impalement. This method, far from rare, was a sadistic favorite of Count Vlad, infamously known as Dracula. In 15th century Romania, prisoners were forced to sit on sharp, iron-tipped stakes, their eyes wide with terror. The stakes were then gradually raised, slowly impaling the body, inch by inch, in a macabre dance with death. Victims often died over the course of 3 agonizing days, bleeding internally as the stakes pierced vital organs. Legend has it, Vlad used this method on over 20,000 people, watching them suffer while he feasted, their screams blending with his bloodthirsty laughter. 4. Torture by the tub. Also known as the sitting tub, this method instilled dread in all who heard of it. Prisoners were placed snugly in a wooden tub, with only their head left exposed to the world. Then, their faces were smeared with milk and honey, not out of mercy, but as a trap. The sweet mixture attracted swarms of flies, which feasted on their skin. Meanwhile, the victims were force-fed, not to keep them alive, but to ensure the tub filled with their own waste. Within days, their bodies began to rot as maggots consumed them from the inside out, a slow death wrapped in filth and misery. 5. The Heretic's Fork. This sinister device was a 2-pronged metal rod, sharpened at both ends, attached to a strap around the neck. One prong was placed beneath the chin, the other pressed against the chest. Victims were suspended so their bodies hung in the air, forced to remain completely still. Every breath became a battle. If they nodded off from exhaustion or lost consciousness, the prongs would drive through their throat and chest, tearing them open, unleashing a torrent of blood, and ending their life in one final, merciless stroke. 6. The Shame Collar. Humiliating and agonizing, this method required immense endurance, one few possessed. Victims were fitted with heavy collars made of metal or wood, pressing down like an eternal shackle. What made this punishment so cruel wasn't just the weight, but the impossibility of rest. The collars were designed so the victim couldn't lower their head, lie down, or even eat normally. For an entire week they were trapped in this torturous restraint, each moment a painful fight to breathe through the silent torment of shame. 7. Crucifixion. This method dates back to ancient times and was mostly practiced in Western countries. Shockingly, there are still reports of some regions using this brutal form of punishment today. Crucifying a person, nailing them to a cross, is widely known through the story of Jesus Christ, a tale soaked in blood and tears. This form of torture inflicted extreme pain on the victim in the slowest way imaginable. They were left hanging, suspended between life and death, until they finally succumbed. It took about 3-4 days to kill someone by crucifixion, with each breath feeling like a dagger cutting deep into the body and soul. 9. Iron coffin. A notorious form of torture from the Middle Ages, used widely across Europe. The victim was placed inside an iron cage that fit the adult human body exactly, like a cold, living coffin. To amplify the cruelty, heavier prisoners were stuffed into smaller cages. The cage was then hoisted up onto a tree or post, left dangling in midair, exposed to the elements, and to birds that would peck and tear their flesh apart until death, each scream lost to the uncaring sky. 11. Sawing a person in half. From ancient Roman times, the criminal was hung upside down, their legs trembling in the air. A saw was then placed between the legs and drawn downward, slicing through the body vertically. The most terrifying part? The victim remained conscious and fully aware of the pain until the saw reached their head and split the body into 2 bloody halves, blood flowing like a river amid desperate screams. 12. The death table. This torture device resembled a long table made of wood and iron, with rollers at each end and a central lever to move them. The victim was laid out, limbs tied to the rollers. Then, the torturer would operate the lever to pull the limbs in opposite directions. The prisoner experienced unimaginable agony. First the skin tore, then the muscles ripped apart, and finally the bones snapped one by one, each crack echoing like the death knell of the soul. 13. Lingqi. Death by 1,000 cuts. A practice common in China, where the executioner slowly cut away parts of the prisoner's body, leading to a prolonged and agonizing death. Lingqi was reserved for particularly severe crimes like treason, mass murder, or patricide. Every cut was a brutal reminder of unforgiving cruelty. 14. Quartering by horses. 4 or 5 horses. The criminal's limbs were tied to 4 ropes, each connected to a different horse. When the execution began, the horses were whipped to run in 4 separate directions, tearing the victim's body apart limb by limb. A variation involved a 5th rope tied to the neck, intensifying the agony before death. 15. Dismemberment by axe or knife. Mainly practiced in England, the victim's head was tied with rope and dragged by horses to the execution site. Weakened and barely alive, they were then cut into multiple pieces using knives or axes. These remains were often displayed publicly. This punishment was exclusively for men, serving as a statement of the justice system's brutal authority. 16. Flaying. Perhaps the most barbaric and uncivilized form of medieval torture. Prisoners were skinned alive, each strip of flesh torn off while they screamed in agony. Even after being flayed, they were left to bleed to death. Salt was sometimes sprinkled on their open wounds to increase the pain. This punishment was used on criminals, war captives, and witches, and was practiced over 1,000 years ago in the Middle East and Africa. 17. Disembowelment. Most often targeting the intestines, this punishment was used on thieves or those accused of adultery. The victim's stomach was slit open and internal organs, mainly from the abdominal area, were pulled out. Blood gushed as their cries of pain became almost inhuman. 18. Nailing into the head. The victim's limbs were bound and their necks secured tightly. During execution, their head was clamped in place while an iron nail was hammered into the skull. Each blow of the hammer drove the nail deeper, and each strike carved away another moment of life in unbearable pain. 19. River drifting. In ancient Persia, a stripped-down prisoner was tied to a raft and force-fed milk and honey. The raft was then set adrift down a river. The sugary diet caused diarrhea, and the body, smeared in waste, attracted insects. The victim died a slow, humiliating death, eaten alive by bugs and weakened by exposure, their body decaying in the cold current. 20. Boiling in oil. one of the most vicious methods imaginable. Victims were thrown directly into vats of boiling oil, their flesh scorched instantly. Death was swift, but their screams, right before they were silenced forever, were unforgettable. 21. Execution by elephant. Used in South and Southeast Asia for over 4,000 years. Reports indicate that this method was also practiced by the Romans and under the Nguyen dynasty in Vietnam. The immense strength of the elephant crushed the human body into pulp within seconds. 22. Burning alive. Mainly practiced in Rome, Acragas in Sicily, Italy, England, and some regions of North America. The victim's body was set alight in a specific sequence, starting from the legs, then thighs, hands, torso, arms, upper chest, face, until death. Turpentine was often poured to accelerate the flames. Thick black smoke mixed with the harrowing screams to create a hellish spectacle. 23. Psychological terror with rats. This animal-based torture method was horrifying in both body and mind. A metal container filled with panicked rats was placed on the victim's body. The torturer then heated the container. In terror, the rats attempted to escape by gnawing through the prisoner's flesh. The pain was physical, but the mental trauma often drove victims to madness. The truth behind history and the present. Do you believe this is real? What you've just read is merely a depiction of what happened in the past. But what's even more terrifying is that today, in our modern world, similarly brutal forms of torture are still being carried out on a daily basis. Numerous other cruel torture methods, such as sexual abuse, insect bites, force feeding, injections of mind-altering drugs, and electric shocks, are being used by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, to persecute Falun Gong practitioners. This bloody persecution, initiated by Jiang Zemin, has led to one of the most barbaric atrocities of our time. Falun Gong, a spiritual practice embraced by many for its health and mental benefits, became the target of a ruthless suppression campaign simply due to its wide popularity. The Chinese regime not only fabricated lies to deceive the world, but also committed unforgivable crimes, the most horrifying being live organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners, turning them into a source of organs for the black market to gain profit. This persecution is not a thing of the past. It continues to this day, a permanent stain on the history of humankind. Inside the cold, lifeless walls of Chinese detention centers and psychiatric hospitals, cruelty has reached unimaginable extremes. These methods are not just intended to destroy the physical body, but to crush the spirit, forcing victims to abandon their belief in truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Yet even in the darkness of oppression and violence, those being persecuted do not yield. Risking their lives, they strive to expose the truth, presenting detailed reports with real evidence. These materials, secretly collected and sent to the outside world, shine as flickers of light within a nightmare. Modern torture methods. Stabbing with brushes and stuffing the mouth with dirty rags. To stop practitioners from shouting "Falun Dafa is good" in protest of the persecution, non-practitioner inmates often stab and twist dirty, germ-laden shoe brushes inside their mouths before shoving filthy rags deep into their throats. Falun Gong practitioners' mouths became infected and bled, the pain unbearable. The rags were often pushed so far down their throats that they constantly felt like vomiting and struggled to breathe. After stuffing their mouths, guards would tightly wrap and bind cloths around their heads and faces, twisting them to cause intense pain. Hair often got caught and pulled, and the scalp became swollen and red. The rags were shoved in with force to the point of suffocation, each second a battle to stay alive. Exposure to freezing cold and drenching with cold water. Guards frequently left those who refused to renounce Falun Gong exposed to freezing temperatures, where the cold penetrated to the bone. Some practitioners were stripped naked and forced to endure icy winds, then doused with freezing water from head to toe, their bodies shaking uncontrollably. In October 2017, Ms. Zhang Dao from Pingdu City was sentenced to 3 years and imprisoned in January 2018. When a fellow inmate tried to coerce her into signing a statement renouncing her faith and she refused, she was tortured. The inmate forced her to sit still and stare forward without moving while windows were left open all winter long, exposing her to the cold. On one occasion, the inmate poured freezing water over her and stomped on her toes until they turned black and blue, causing excruciating pain that reached her bones. Leg-splitting torture, forced splits. The torture facility had 2 small, dark, soundproof rooms on the second floor, less than 2 meters wide and 5 meters long, like burial boxes for the living. The walls were lined with thick padding, even the squat toilet was covered. These rooms had no windows. From the outside, no sounds could be heard, as if they existed in a world cut off from life. The suffocating stench of formaldehyde hung thick in the air, so strong it made it hard to open one's eyes. Even flies avoided the place. That pungent odor had lingered for over a decade. The toilets were rarely flushed, mixing filth with the scent of death. In winter, no blankets were given. Windows along the hallway were all open, and even the doors of the small rooms were left ajar, turning them into frozen chambers where every breath became visible. In summer, every window and door was shut, transforming the space into an unbearable sauna. Slave labor prisoners collapsed within 2 days, yet one Falun Gong practitioner was locked inside for 3 years, as if condemned to hell. One prisoner said the room was filled with torture instruments, and even snakes and insects were used on steadfast practitioners. One practitioner meditated in prison to stay mentally clear. When another inmate saw her meditating, she instructed others to force her legs into a full split, trying to tear her body apart. 2 inmates sat on stools, each weighing down one of her legs. They slowly moved the stools backward to widen the split, causing unbearable pain in her inner thighs. One inmate, a former dancer, claimed the position wouldn't break bones, but the truth was, the pain far surpassed human endurance. Many practitioners were forced into splits. Some inmates scrubbed their heads, faces, and mouths with filthy toilet brushes. Others lifted and threw them to the ground, pinched, twisted, and struck their armpits and thighs, and stabbed their private areas with brushes. Screams echoed through the night. Blood-stained clothes or paper were often thrown out, traces of lives being trampled. During forced splits, inmates pinched their inner arms while moving the stools backward. Practitioners trembled and screamed in agony. Sometimes they were pushed face down to the floor and their backs were stomped, bones cracking audibly under the pressure. Their hands were also trampled on, fingers and backs of hands crushed, turning black and bruised, with pain lingering long after leaving prison. Specific torture techniques. Flying, airplane torture. In this method, the victim's head must be bent forward as far as possible, while both arms are pulled back and held high, pressed against a wall, resembling a bird with broken wings. They are forced to maintain this posture for extremely long periods, often over 10 hours, each minute a test of their physical limits. If the practitioner refuses to cooperate, they are shocked with electric batons or beaten until unconscious, then violently awakened to resume the torture, without mercy. Piercing shackles, death cuffs. Both legs of the practitioner are chained with heavy iron shackles, tightly locked to the ground. Their hands are then bound between their thighs using death cuffs, a special type of restraint. This torture method forces them to sit in one position for prolonged periods, making it impossible to move, stand, use the toilet, or eat properly. It causes muscle damage, swelling in the limbs, insomnia, and unbearable pain, often pushing the victim to the brink of collapse. Previously, this method was used only on death row inmates in China. Now it's employed as a tool of torment against innocent people. Flying swallow. In this method, the lower body of the practitioner is tied to both sides of a bed, while both hands are cuffed tightly to either side, stretching the body until it's completely immobilized, unable to move in any way. Many Falun Gong practitioners were tortured like this for a week or more, with some suffering this for up to 4 months. This method did not allow any movement, not even a slight change in position, let alone turning over. Over time, their muscles were severely injured, mental stress escalated, and they suffered from intense itching and extreme pain. Brutal force feeding. This is not the same as medical IV feeding used to save lives. The persecutors in China use it as a savage form of torture to force practitioners to renounce their faith. Some practitioners were force-fed highly concentrated salt water, chili water, strong alcohol, soapy water, and even urine or human feces, each drop like poison seeping into their bodies. Police ordered inmates to torture them, forcing air into the feeding tubes and stomping on their stomachs, causing the salt water to gush back out through their eyes and nose, painful to the point of suffocation. Some torturers forbade practitioners from using the restroom and instead hung them upside down from the ceiling, forcing them to urinate and defecate on themselves, utterly humiliating. Hanging upside down. This method causes blood to rush to the head and can lead to unconsciousness or death if prolonged. At times, police forbade practitioners from using the restroom and humiliated them by hanging them upside down. Suspension with hands cuffed behind the back. Both hands are cuffed behind the back, and the practitioner is suspended by the wrists, with their feet off the ground or only the toes touching. They are hung from a basketball hoop or horizontal bar using chains attached to the cuffs. This causes the hands and arms to go numb due to lack of circulation, potentially leading to permanent disability. Simultaneously, they are beaten with sticks or leather whips. Being crushed under a bed. This is a brutally savage method. The practitioner's legs and feet are tied together, and their hands are bound behind the back. Their neck and legs are then tied together, nearly choking them. The entire body is pushed underneath the bed, and several people stand on the bed above, pressing down on the spine until it cracks, producing a horrifying sound. This causes severe injury, like a slow execution. Burning with heated objects. Police used lit cigarettes to burn practitioners' faces, leaving permanent scars. Some sadistic torturers deliberately burned the faces of young, beautiful female practitioners, permanently disfiguring them. This method also involved using lighters to burn eyebrows, chins, hands, thighs, and even sensitive body parts. Sometimes a metal rod was heated red-hot using charcoal, then pressed onto the chest and thighs, flesh burning while the victims screamed in agony. Being bitten by insects. In summer, especially at dawn or dusk, police stripped practitioners naked and cuffed them to poles in areas frequented by mosquitoes, bees, and insects. Their entire bodies were bitten, covered in red, swollen lumps. At times, their eyelids were so swollen they couldn't open their eyes, enduring pain like being stabbed by thousands of needles. Electric shock torture. To torture steadfast practitioners, police placed electric devices on their heads or chests, instantly causing them to collapse. These devices damaged the brain and internal organs, causing memory loss, confusion, exhaustion, and extreme pain, yet leaving no visible injuries because the harm comes from sound waves. This included electric batons that caused full-body convulsions. Zhao Ru from Jilin province was tortured with this device and collapsed, needing to be carried away. Exposure under scorching sun. Police shackled practitioners under the blazing sun, causing dehydration, fainting, and severe sunburn. In some brainwashing centers, they were locked in suffocating solitary cells with poor ventilation while the heating was turned up to intensify the torture. Dragged behind motorcycles. Police and guards tied practitioners with ropes and dragged them behind fast-moving motorcycles, causing deep wounds, severe bleeding, and sometimes exposed bones, leaving them in horrifying conditions. Injection of psychiatric drugs. The CCP's insidious method. Psychological torture includes injecting unknown drugs that damage the victim's nervous system, more horrifying than physical abuse. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, uses this method on dissidents, Falun Gong practitioners, and citizens who dare to oppose the government. They are treated like lab rats, subjected to prolonged hallucinations and irreversible damage to the central nervous system. This method can drive healthy individuals insane or even kill them after so-called treatment. This form of psychological torture has been condemned by the World Psychiatric Association and other international bodies. Below are 7 cases demonstrating the indescribable pain caused by this horrifying method. 1. Injected with unknown substance and died in extreme pain. In July 2004, Chang Yongfu, a 44-year-old Falun Gong practitioner, was taken to a psychiatric hospital in Harbin and forcibly injected with drugs. 2 years later, he was released in a state of mental collapse, his face swollen and his vision impaired. He couldn't sleep at night and screamed out repeatedly. He told his family he had been injected with unknown drugs that caused immense pain. His nose was swollen and bleeding, and he had gone blind. When he died on January 18, 2007, blood flowed from his ears, eyes, nose, and mouth. 2. Mood-altering drugs. Qiao Zhongling, a 74-year-old pro-democracy activist, was labeled mentally ill by police and transferred between 3 psychiatric hospitals in Shanghai over 9 years. He was forced to take psychiatric drugs, which severely damaged his health. According to Dr. Ma Jinshin, now living in the U.S., the mood-altering drugs harmed him, causing hand and mouth tremors, high cholesterol, and memory loss. His condition was very poor. 3. She struggled like she'd gone mad. Zhang Fuzhen, a Falun Gong practitioner from Shandong, was arrested in 2001 and taken to a brainwashing center. Sun Fuxiang, assigned to monitor Zhang, witnessed the events leading to her death. The police stripped her naked and shaved her head. They tortured and humiliated her. She was tied in the big character, Da, position on a bed and forced to relieve herself there. Then they injected her with a toxic, unknown drug. She immediately experienced unbearable pain, thrashed around like someone gone mad, and died in extreme agony. 4. Brain damage. After 7 injections, Wang Weihe, a practitioner from Shandong, was sent to a psychiatric hospital in 2000. A particular drug, usually administered monthly, was given to Falun Gong practitioners. One day, a doctor kicked him to the ground, tied him to an iron bed, tortured him, and injected him 7 times over 11 hours. As a result, Wang entered a vegetative state, drooling and unable to care for himself. 5. 24-year-old woman left blind and deaf after injections. Wang Yujie was arrested in March 2010, detained in a forced labor camp for a year, then transferred to a brainwashing center in Wuhan. Before her release, she was injected with unknown drugs. At home, she foamed at the mouth, vomited violently, couldn't eat, and cried from constant pain. She became blind, deaf, and her hands deformed. She died in September 2011, just 24 years old, after 4 months of agony. 6. Psychological and physical torture, drug injections. Gulbakar Jalilova, a Uyghur Muslim woman, was imprisoned for 15 months in a women's prison in Xinjiang until September 2018. She witnessed many people being forced to take unknown drugs and receive monthly injections of substances that numbed emotions. She said, "The injection makes you feel like you don't have any memory. You don't remember your family. You don't want to escape. You feel nothing. It's a very strange feeling." She also saw a woman collapse while eating poisoned food, foaming at the mouth and becoming paralyzed. And another inmate was killed by injections right before her eyes, like a living nightmare. 7. They injected me with several kinds of drugs. Wei Fengju was released from a labor camp in Changchun on April 13, 2007, after suffering both physical and mental torture. She was emaciated, unable to eat, and incapable of self-care. A month later, she developed severe diarrhea, body-wide pain, rapid weight loss, vision problems, and mental disturbances. She died in July that same year. She told her family, "I won't make it. They injected me with several kinds of drugs." After the CCP began its persecution of Falun Gong in 1999, psychiatric hospitals increased across China. In September 2004, the Ministry of Public Security ordered all provinces, autonomous regions, and municipalities to establish psychiatric hospitals if they didn't already have one. Since March 2014, Minghui.org, a website publishing direct information about the persecution of Falun Gong, has reported over 7,700 articles about practitioners being tortured in psychiatric hospitals. However, the actual number is believed to be much higher due to the difficulty of gathering such information. The CCP forces practitioners to take psychiatric drugs to destroy their will and coerce them into renouncing their faith. Other groups, such as democracy activists, Uyghur Muslims, and political dissidents, also suffer from similar forms of torture. thrown into a cell to be raped by male prisoners. According to the International Human Rights Association, victims are often sexually abused by police or prison guards, or stripped naked and thrown into cells with male prisoners. Guards explicitly told the inmates that they could rape the woman without being punished, an open invitation to commit a crime. According to human rights activists, although torture is officially banned in China, it is still widely and systematically practiced in prisons across the country. Sexual torture is notoriously effective in humiliating and breaking down the victim's resistance. Survivors of torture describe the depravity of some individuals within China's security apparatus as having no limits. Amnesty International has reported that sexual torture has long been used on Uyghur Muslim political prisoners in Xinjiang, employing horrific methods such as inserting horsehair into the penis or using barbed wires that lie flat upon insertion and expand when pulled out. Tibetan women have not been spared this fate either. One group of Tibetan nuns was stripped, beaten, and had their genitals electrocuted with electric batons in front of male prisoners. In the mid-2000s, renowned human rights lawyer Gao Zhisheng traveled to various provinces across China to investigate the abuse of Falun Gong practitioners in detention camps. He exposed that the majority of Falun Gong detainees, male and female alike, had been sexually tortured. For speaking out in their defense, Gao himself was arrested and subjected to horrific forms of torture, including having toothpicks stabbed into his genitals, a chilling testament to the cost of courage. In reality, rape has been systematically used as a tool of humiliation and torture against female Falun Gong practitioners. At the Masanja forced labor camp, guards once pushed 18 female practitioners into a cell full of male prisoners, inciting them to rape the women. Some of the victims were left disabled, mentally broken, or dead. In April 2016, during a hearing by the U.S. Congressional Executive Commission on China, Falun Gong practitioner Yin Liping recounted her horrifying experience. She described how, during one instance of being detained with 8 other female practitioners in a black cell, 4 men beat her unconscious and then took turns raping her. When she awoke, she discovered they had recorded the entire assault, leaving her with a pain and humiliation that could never be erased. The horror of Masanja forced labor camp. The Masanja forced labor camp in Shenyang, Liaoning province, is infamous for torturing Falun Gong practitioners for nearly 20 years. The camp's goal was to force them to renounce their faith through extremely brutal methods. Many were tortured to death, disabled, or driven insane. The cruelty inflicted there shocked the international community. In the first 6 months of 2010 alone, over 150 practitioners were detained there. From October 2009 to early 2010, many suffered horrific torture. Some of the brutal torture methods at Masanja included stretching bed. Both hands of the practitioner were fixed between 2 bunk beds, sometimes one arm on the top bunk, the other on the bottom. 1 or 2 people then pulled the beds apart, stretching the limbs painfully. The handcuffs cut into their flesh, causing swollen, numb wrists. Leg splitting. Practitioners were forced to sit on the floor with their hands tied to the bed rails. One person pulled one leg to one side, while another pulled the other leg in the opposite direction to split the legs. Some practitioners couldn't walk for 1 to 2 months due to injured muscles and ligaments. One practitioner from Jinju still couldn't walk properly 6 months later, even with assistance. Hanging. Victims had their hands cuffed either together or separately and were hung from heating pipes with their feet off the ground. The handcuffs cut deep into the skin. Before and after the 2008 Olympics, those who refused to renounce Falun Gong resumed practicing after previously giving up, or were newly imprisoned, faced even more brutal torture. Suspension bed. The practitioner's arms, legs, and abdomen were tied to a bed frame, while the upper body was suspended, bent at almost a 90-degree angle. After several days, they could no longer stand upright or walk normally. Legs were severely injured, and both wrists went numb. On July 14, 2008, at least 7 out of 50 practitioners transferred from Beijing were tortured in this manner. Other forms of torture included electric shocks with batons, electric shocks to women's chests, solitary confinement in tiny cells, beatings, slapping, and forced singing of communist songs. Testimonies collected by lawyer Gao Zhisheng. Wang Lijun, a Falun Gong practitioner, was tortured 3 times in a small iron cage. Inmates used knotted ropes to saw back and forth across her genitals, causing severe swelling. Following orders from the head female guard, they then stabbed her swollen genitals with the broken tip of a mop handle, causing profuse bleeding. She couldn't wear pants, urinate, or sit, and her legs became paralyzed. 2 months later, she still couldn't sit up straight. She also witnessed another virgin practitioner being tortured similarly. At times, poisonous insects were released onto the bodies of female practitioners. Liu Shukin from Changchun reported, "Because there wasn't a single uninjured spot on my body after several days of torture, they began electrocuting and stabbing my private parts with electric batons. Then they whipped my genitals with electric batons. I passed out. Half an hour later, they came to check if I was still alive. I don't know how long it took before I saw daylight again. By then, I was near death." She was taken to the Changchun Public Security Bureau headquarters, where there were many small cells. In each room was a tiger bench, and on each bench sat a female Falun Gong practitioner, most of them unconscious, with their lower bodies naked or barely covered by a thin cloth. Wei Chun, also from Changchun, was handcuffed behind her back for 5 days and nights without sleep. They stuffed lit cigarettes into her mouth and nose, until her mouth was filled with cigarette butts. At one point, a police officer beat her repeatedly with an iron rod. She continued, "On June 4th, I, along with Liu Yonglai, Ku Fei, and Huang Wenzhong, was taken to the 4th floor. They stripped Liu and me naked, cuffed our hands together, and forced us to stand face to face. 6 electric batons were used simultaneously, shocking our heads, backs, arms, legs, chests, necks, and even genitals. The torture lasted an hour. After that, they separated us. Liu was handcuffed behind his back and forced to lie face down on the grass. 2 chairs were placed on his back, and 2 inmates sat on them while 6 others continued shocking his back, buttocks, neck, legs, feet, and genitals with electric batons. They even pulled out his genitals to torture them separately. As for us female Falun Gong practitioners, we were stripped naked, our limbs tightly stretched and tied to the corners of a bed for more than 26 days. We endured endless humiliation and sexual assaults by police, doctors, and inmates. I was handcuffed behind my back, my head covered with a cloth bag, and my neck tied tightly with rope so I couldn't breathe or see. They tied me up, threw me into the back of a police truck, and drove me to a mountain, where they could freely torture Falun Gong practitioners. Many were killed there. I personally witnessed Liu Haibo being stripped naked and forced to kneel. They used the longest electric baton, inserted it through his lower body, and shocked the inside of his body. He died instantly, a horrifying and tragic death, all because of his peaceful faith. A cry from the darkness. This is not just a memory from the past. It is a painful reality that continues today. The muffled screams, the silent bloodshed, and the unyielding spirits are all waiting for us to hear them. What will you do in the face of these atrocities? Stay silent, or speak out to end this nightmare. The truth cannot be buried forever. Each of us bears the responsibility to ignite the light of justice.